Hello, beautiful people. My name is Anthony. I am a dungeon master, and this is the campaign diary for my 34-week-long campaign that I've been running for a while now. And this is the first episode of the diary. The first episode proper, of course. Last episode was our episode 0, our session 0, where I introduced everyone to characters, although I did make a little bit of a misstep in doing that. I introduced the character that my friend Sam was playing right now instead of the character that he was playing back at the time. So I'm going to do a really quick introduction to that character, a very brief one. At the time when we first started the campaign, my friend Sam was playing a character named Luth Bookkeeper. His last name was more of a title because he was like this bastard kid who got sold off and didn't really have a family. So his mother sold him to a wizard who was looking to find the best possible way to produce essentially like a wizard helper, an apprentice, if you will. And he did some really fucking messed up, I believe his name was like Malefax, the wizard that is. He did some really messed up thing to all of these kids that he essentially bought, who were unwanted or unloved. And it caused Luth to become detached from his emotions. And instead of being able to feel emotions proper, he sort of became like a sponge, an emotional vampire, or an emotional sponge, if you will. And he could only really feel his emotions through proximity to those emotions, specifically the most extreme cases of them. And long story, still pretty long, his character was in essentially a 3x3 cell, and living on the floor, and a figure appeared to him, and the figure was an elder god named Athamas. And Athamas was wearing like a long white overcoat, basically, with white trousers and a white shirt, and on the front of his overcoat was his symbol, which is basically the comedy and tragedy masks combined, put together, like half of the face is smiling and the other half is sad. And Athamas told him that he could set Luth free if Luth agreed to basically be his servant forever. And if you don't know where this is going, it ends up with Luth becoming a warlock, Athamas killing Malefax, and setting Luth free. And essentially that is Luth's backstory. He left the area where he was being held captive in the city, and he found out that he was like much different than he used to be, very strange with these warlock capabilities, and he really didn't want to draw a lot of attention to himself. This character was lawful evil, by the way. And so he led a really mundane existence, but he would go to places of great emotion and experience, like the arena in the city, the Fate Glory Arena, or like taverns, like really rough and tumble, rowdy taverns where people get into a fight a lot. Things like that. And he would like soak in that emotion. And as part of his backstory, I gave him the ability to roll D4 and gain, when he's around intense emotion, regardless of if it's positive or negative, he would gain temporary hit points whenever he exposed himself to that per short rest or something like that. I can't remember. But it was an interesting little backstory, and I thought it was very unique, and so I rewarded it with a little bit of a special ability and mechanic. So essentially what he would do is use the telepathy that he gets from being a warlock, and he would like listen to people's thoughts so that he could better gauge how to get the biggest reaction out of them. He was a pretty fucking dickhead character, pardon my language, and he not a very nice guy. He will do some things in the future that may call into question the morality, severely call into question the morality of the character. But for now, let's just stick with that. That is mostly Luth's backstory. So how the entire campaign gets started is that there is a well-known dwarven mage and his name is Arcanist Golric Greybrow. And he wanted to study the effects, much like I mentioned in our Session 0, the effects of long-term exposure to a paradise environment and what it does to the body and to the mind over prolonged periods of time. So with the help of a powerful artifact and his own magic and a team of assistants, basically other apprentices, he put a bunch of people into a deep state of stasis, where mentally they would be within this paradise world. Their bodies would be within his tower, like a mage tower in the mage district of the city of Solara. But as far as their mind was concerned, they were in this paradise, and the paradise could be whatever they wanted. Now, the promise of this was that each participant, after 9 months, which is an exceptionally long time, that's over a year in my campaign. There are only 4 months in a year, but each month is 8 weeks, and each week is 8 days. I'll get into that afterwards. Actually, I have a PDF of that. I guess I could put it in the description, probably upload it somewhere and put it in the description if people are really interested. So if you're interested in like the minutia of the campaign and the like, I have like a PDF that has all of the, oh, this is what time is like, and this is what the races are like, and this is all the districts and the city and the ruling house, and basically lore and world building type stuff. If you're interested in that, I'll put that down below in the description. But circling back to what this video is actually about, and so everyone who volunteered for this was to be paid 5,000 gold pieces, and they would be gifted a small parcel of land in a district of the city of their choosing. And Arcanist Golric was pretty well known, and he had done some very successful arcane research in the past, which afforded him the ability to make good on this promise. So no one went into this as a volunteer under the impression that it was a sham or that they were going to get screwed somehow. Now, throughout the process of this, they settle in and then they're put into their paradise. Each one of the players, Luth, Runin, Rubius, and Aragrax, they all experience for, I believe, 4 or 5 months of an intense, like, paradise that catered to their every need, and it was pretty awesome. But then things started to take a dark turn, and their paradises slowly became corrupted and turned into this nightmarish experience where their worst fears were constantly being relived over and over. Every single day, it would be the same thing. For Runin, he would constantly watch his friend get ridden down by his superior officer in the city guard and killed in front of him over and over again. Every single time he opened his eyes, that's what he saw. For Rubius, he constantly had to make the choice of which friend to dive on to save them from the lightning bolt from their skirmish. And of course, for Grax, it was him killing a large number of his squad mates and dealing with the fallout of that over and over again. And for Luth, he was constantly being tortured by his wizard mentor, who had purchased him from his mother and did experiments on him to try to create the best apprentice possible. And so these nightmares became quite extreme for them, very tied into their psyche and what makes their characters, basically. And after a little while, eventually they shook free of this, and they're not sure how much time has passed, but the 4 of them, they come to the top of, it's a very different place than the one that they went to. Their things are all in chests along the wall far opposite of them, and they realize that they're in like some kind of circular tower. They look out one of the slits in the tower, and they're out in a mountainous region, which is nowhere near where Solara is, so they surmise that they must be in a different location. So they gather all of their things, and they put on their gear and such, and then they decide to exit the room. Runin, being the group's fighter, he decides to take the forefront, and the other fighter, Rubius, he is pretty close behind him. They exit out into a hallway and they see a doorway and then a stairway. On their right-hand side is the doorway, and in front of them, leading down in a circular motion, is the staircase. Obviously, circular staircase, circular tower, etc. You get the picture. They decide to go to the door, and they open it, and what they see inside is beds that they were laying on, very similar beds than the ones that they were laying on. And there are people in there that are strapped down to the beds. But they do not look like the party. They look different, gaunt and warped, and their muscles have like atrophied, and they look really messed up. Just super really messed up. They decide, okay, well, we'll scope this place out and then come back for these guys later when we get help. Not a bad idea. They go down the staircase and they come upon a room. And inside this room, they hear shuffling on the other side of the door, which is only closed over. It's not completely closed. But they hear some shuffling coming from inside, and they can hear some mumbling. So they open the door. These guys are very, what's the word? They're not particularly careful about their engagements. So they open the door and they go in, and they see a couple of the very similar looking people to the ones that they saw upstairs in the beds. But these ones are animated, whereas the other ones seem to be in somewhat of a coma. These two are shuffling around, and they continue to mumble the word Jareen, which the rest of the group has no idea what that means. The party, rather. And so they engage with these people in an attempt to go non-lethal. Runin suggests that everyone attempt not to kill these people, because if their perspective on events is correct, these were also volunteers, and they, maybe the condition is reversible. You don't want to kill these guys, basically, is Runin's perspective. Everybody agrees after Rubius runs one through with his fucking sword, and then they knock the two unconscious and they tie them up. There's an exit door from the room that they just reached, and they make their way downstairs even further. And they come across another room, but this room doesn't have anyone in it. It does have a large, glowing, magical glyph on the floor. And the group is unsure of what to do because there doesn't appear to be any other way out of this tower. So they step on the glyph one at a time, and the glyph lets out into basically a small little closet somewhere else. Now, where they were was a tower out in the middle of, well, I'm not going to tell you where because that may come up in the future, but they were definitely not in the city, and the glyph teleported them into a small but well-furnished manor house inside of the city. But they didn't have any perspective of this, right? They're in a closet when they step through this teleportation glyph. So they reorient themselves, and they wait a few seconds to see if they hear anything on the outside, and they don't. So they open the door, and it leads out into a large basically a large living sitting room with a big wooden long table in the middle and some chairs around it. Basically, it looks like where someone of nobility or wealth would take their meals. There's a big fireplace, and there's a couple other doors in here, but the group hears arguing coming from across the way. Behind another door. And they can hear a male arguing with a female. Now, they do not take the time to try to do any kind of perception check or anything like that to listen. They just barge right through after they start hearing a few choice words. I let them know a few words. I told them that you heard the word Jareen, and you could hear someone shouting about how they don't have time to continue with the experiment anymore. So they barge through the door, and they're sitting across the way. There's a long carpet that leads up to a makeshift throne, basically an imitation throne, what somebody who thinks that they're better than they actually are might have, essentially. And on this throne is sitting a woman, and she is a human, and she's wearing a very beautiful blue dress, and she has long black hair and a very fierce features, very fierce facial features. And standing next to her is a almost grotesque-looking individual, what appears to be what was once a elf, but is now some kind of amalgamated creature. Looks the torso and the legs and the face and the head and all of that. He looks to be an elf, but he has 4 extra appendages that come out of his back that end in tipped points, basically like Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man, except they're not mechanical, they're fleshy, and they end in like spear points almost. And the group, not attempting to be stealthy at all, barge into this room, and immediately a fight breaks out, and it's initiative. So the group goes back and forth a little while with Jareen and her right-hand man, Tetra, and they fight it out for a little while, and eventually Jareen begins to chant a spell. The group is unsure of what this is going to do, but they're pretty certain it can't be good. They realize very quickly that all of their attacks directed at Jareen seem to have very little effect, and Tetra is amongst them, and he is most certainly doing a significant portion of damage. Luth almost dies. He's down to 2 hit points at this point, and then both of them Tetra blinks. He has the capacity to teleport short distances as a reaction. And it was very much, this was not an encounter that I balanced for the party to win. There was very little chance of them successfully defeating Jareen and her right-hand man during the first session. But I did want them to have the opportunity to win. So the teleportation spell that Jareen is casting, normally she would just teleport, right? But I decided to give it a 3-turn, essentially charge-up period, so that the group could attempt to make her break concentration or kill her outright. Unfortunately, they were unable to do this, so her and Tetra blinks over to her side, and the 2 of them teleport, and they're gone. The group searches the room, and aside from the very fine blue carpet and some tapestries, they find some coin hidden in an arm of the throne, and they also find a few letters, journal entries, basically. And these journal entries point them towards the fact that whatever it was that they were doing, they had assassinated Arcanist Golric and killed him. Jareen had pretended to be an assistant and working with Golric, and then, of course, orchestrated the death of him and everyone that was part of his research team. And then she began to corrupt the paradises to reflect everyone's worst memories and worst fears. And because of this, things got pretty dicey for everyone in the nightmares, and a lot of people broke, and they became warped and twisted, which was the mind-shocked people that they came across before they stepped on the magical teleportation rune to get to this place. Now, they couldn't go back through that rune. They tried, and it didn't work. So they're not sure how they're going to rescue those people, but they know that it's on their list of things they want to do. They continue to look through the letters, and after a little while, they come across the fact that this had been a long-running plan that they had put into motion a while ago, before this, before volunteers were even being sought after by Arcanist Golric. And essentially, she had wanted to come up with a way to perfect mind-altering magic. She's comparative to the party, she's a higher-level spellcaster, but in reality, she was a lower-level spellcaster. I believe she was level 6 at the time, and so the party saw her as a big threat because she was, but as far as enchantment and mind-altering magic go, that doesn't get you a whole lot, and so she was trying to perfect a way to make a permanent mind-altering magic so that she could usurp the throne of Solara and basically have the king and queen be puppet king and queen, while she really actually held all of the sway and power. These are really lofty goals, and to be completely honest with you as the listener now, they were somewhat unrealistic, but she was extremely arrogant, and she was an angry and vengeful sort of person, someone who believes that they were very much better than they really were. She was a very self-inflated, and she really had an inflated sense of self. And so her arrogance led her to believe that this was a possibility for her. And I guess probably given enough time, it might have been. But the party definitely didn't want to see that happen, mostly because not because it was interesting. It wasn't really so much because they thought it was the right thing to do that was to stop her. It was mostly because she kind of screwed them out of 5,000 gold and a piece of land, which a lot of them just really wanted so that they could retire and give up, any kind of adventuring type of life. Not that many of them really had adventuring types of life, but they especially Runin, who saw this as a way to get out and to just live, basically, a modest but enjoyable, peaceful life. So they were really pissed about that, and once they read that Arcanist Golric was dead, they realized, oh shit, because at first Sam and Mark and Tom and Dan, they had thought, oh, Golric, he's a sneaky bastard, he was really trying to mess with us this whole time. And then when they realized that wasn't the case and the poor dwarven bastard was dead, everybody was... well, they were kind of pissed that they had gotten cheated. They thought, well, if Golric was still alive, then maybe we could force it, because they were given writs that technically made them, they were legally bound, he was legally bound to pay these people. But since he was dead, that really wasn't the case anymore. And so they were pretty pissed, and I think rightfully so. Anyways, for any of you budding DMs out there, if you want to motivate your players and everyone tends to play the mercenary we need money type, take their money away and I promise you, it will be effective motivation. I've done it a few times and boy oh boy, does it really motivate people to kill stuff and do things. Moving on from there, they leave this place and they exit out into an alleyway which leads them into the Solara city proper, out in what looks like the market district of the city. They can hear the hustle. They open the door and they can hear the hustle and bustle of the city. They're not sure what to do, though, because if they leave this place, they're not entirely sure. It definitely seems like there's some magic at work, and so they're not sure if this place will still be here when they get back. But they decide to chance it and they step out of the door. When they do, the door closes behind them and it seals and becomes part of the wall, the cobblestone wall, and it disappears. Fortunately, in his inventory, Rubius had some chalk, which he used to draw prices on his fish cart chalkboard, basically. So he marked the area where the door was in chalk pretty heavily, and then they decided, well... Runin knows some people in the city guard, specifically a person named Investigator Lomas. He rolled particularly low on his history check for people he could trust, and he could indeed trust Investigator Lomas, but he wasn't the most competent of city guardsmen. He was basically an investigator that the guardsmen would hire out, kind of like a private investigator, but not really. I know that doesn't make any sense, but he was like this outside investigator who worked very closely with the guardsmen, and he was basically considered to be one, but he didn't really consider himself to be a guardsman, because he didn't want to have to do all of the lowly duty that the guardsmen do, which is walk around on patrol and things. Well, anyway, Lomas is a very... flamboyant is the wrong word. He's a very over-the-top kind of character. He not particularly good at his job, but he thinks that he is, and he's most certainly more... how should I put this? He's definitely a little bit more of a nuisance than the party would have liked. And when they met him, which we'll get to in a second, they pretty much immediately realized, oh shit, we hate this guy. So... pro tip again to all of you budding GMs out there, if you are going to introduce NPCs to your party, which of course everyone must do at some point, make sure that those NPCs are at least either passably likable or designed to piss the party off. Because if you make an NPC who annoys the party, it might ruin the verisimilitude of the players. For example, Sam and Mark, they both hated this fucking guy with a burning passion, and they had snide remarks to say to basically everything that he said because they really, really, really hated this guy. And I don't think it was a particularly logical reason to hate him. I think they just didn't like the fact that he wasn't as effective as they had wanted him to be. Anyway, so they decide to go and they meet up with Investigator Lomas, who is stationed in a circular 1-floor, 15-foot, basically domed guardhouse. And the inside of the place is stacked to the ceiling with books. And the books they didn't have any actual titles or information inlaid into the covers to designate what they were, and so Lomas wrote all of their names in chalk, which constantly was being wiped off or moved around or smeared, so he would have to keep rewriting them, and the party got the sense that this place was very disorganized, and most certainly some of these books were probably labeled wrong. But they hand over the letters that they got, the journal entries, to Lomas, and Lomas, they talk about the pseudonym that she used to sign up as one of Arcanist Golrick's apprentices. And when they brought this up, it triggered something in Lomas's memory, and he goes back through some of the City Guard records and his investigation records. And the party at this point is kind of annoyed with him, but they see that they're making a little bit of progress, so they decide to go ahead and go through with it. Now, my particular players, I hadn't thought of this at the time, but they're not really big. They see any kind of investigation as a wild goose chase, a ring around the rosy, if you will, which is not what I had intended, but it did follow the genuine sort of investigation, go from place to place until you get enough facts to determine what your end goal is. And they were very, very pissed off about this. And at this point, they were starting to get a little bit annoyed. So Lomas tells them that he realizes that the name Meredith, which was the pseudonym that Jareen had used to sign up as an apprentice with Arcanist Golrick, they had the malpractice council, if you will, of the city had come across her before, and she had been using mind-altering magic very openly, which is a really big no-no in the city. Necromancy is more accepted than mind-altering magic. People don't want to ever come face-to-face with the fact that they might have not been in control of their own actions. And so they look into her records, and they find that she owns a curiosity shop. So them and Inspector Lomas, they go to the curiosity shop called Uncanny Curiosities, which is apparently owned by Jareen Nisha. So they go in and they see an old lady who is operating the place. Immediately, their metagaming brains kicked in, and they thought, uh-oh, she's going to pretend to be an old lady, and we're going to get nowhere with this investigation, and we're going to have to handle it on our own, because Lomas isn't going to believe us, and blah, blah, blah. They were totally wrong. They go in, they start talking to the old lady, and the old lady's name, I believe, was Delana, something like that. I believe it was Delana. This was 34 weeks ago, people. I'm sorry. My brain is a little bit sketchy sometimes. I try to keep most of this in my brain, but as many of you probably well know at this point, it can be difficult. So, Delana, she is like this really decrepit old lady, barely able to move. Her hands shake really bad, like she has Parkinson's almost. And it was like I made her out to be like the most sad, pathetic old lady, but she was still warm and friendly and tried to be helpful. They questioned her a little bit, and after they were done questioning her, at this point, my players were very salty. They were like, oh, now another place we gotta go to. Because they had found out that Jareen had no contact with the shop, that Delana had to box up all of the earnings each day and take them to a separate place at the end of every day in the common district, which is where most people live, just generally. It's just like a residential district of the city, basically. And so they were like, oh, great, now we got to go to another place. I don't know why, but my players can be very fucking salty individuals. So they decide to split off from Lomas at this point, but before they do that, Lomas pays the old woman a few gold pieces for her time. And then when they walk out of the shop, what was born from this moment was one of the most memorable and funny lines, I think, from the entirety of the beginning of this campaign, which was when Mark's character, Eric Grax, questioned him about giving money to every person that they meet when they, basically he said, how does the City Watch have any money if you're always going to be paying every person you come into contact with in terms of like witnesses or persons of interest? And Lomas says, well, she's an old lady and we took up a lot of her time and you guys made her very uncomfortable. So I decided to give her a few gold for her troubles. Besides, it's easier to grease palms than it is to hit an old woman with a stick. And that's basically like, Lomas believes that's a saying, like an idiom or something of that sort. And everybody at the table started laughing. So I know I had at least eased tensions a little bit. At this point, everybody decides we've had enough of Lomas and we want to split off from him. And I made that easy for them because I could tell how much he annoyed them. I told them that he had a few other leads that he wanted to run down, and he would split up, and that way they wouldn't have to fucking deal with them anymore, because I could tell they were unhappy as heck. So they decide to go to a place called the Landmasons Guild, which is, Luth knows he spent, after he escaped from his backstory, which was his, the wizard Malefax and all that jazz, he had taken up work as a bookkeeper, which is where his title last name comes from, at the Landmasons Guild. And the Landmasons Guild is basically a huge financial powerhouse for this city. They handle contracting most of the building work. They have their fingers in pretty much every financial pie. They're a huge bank. The crown basically trusts them to handle gathering taxes and supervising the building parts of the city. This city is massive, by the way. And essentially, it's like it's the safest place to store your money. It's a huge hub for information and knowledge, and there's like a huge records library, which is where Luth comes in because he knows a crotchety old gnome who he works at the Landmasons Guild in the record-keeping department, and his name is Tomekeeper Chauvin. And Chauvin is very much gray area sort of character. He takes bribes and lets people look at records that they should not be able to look at. So Luth at this point, he says, all right, well, I know this guy. Let's go to the Landmasons Guild and I'll talk to him. So they go in, and after a brief exchange, which was pretty comical, Luth was like, hey, Chauvin. And Chauvin was like, Luth. And I gave him this very crotchety old man gnome kind of Luth kind of voice. And he drops Chauvin a few gold pieces, and Chauvin slides a huge tome over, and the group finds out that Jareen Nisha, there are two people in the city named Jareen, and they don't know her last name at this point. I keep saying Jareen Nisha because it's kind of like hyphenated, but they don't know that. Everything is just signed with Jareen, and they've only ever heard Jareen. So they find two Jareens in the city, and both of them have different last names, obviously. And so they decide to process of elimination, basically. They narrow it down. They're like, okay, well, this one owns the Uncanny Curiosities, obviously, so we follow that thread till its end, but let's copy down the other information just in case. They Oh boy. At this point, it was getting late. We were approaching 11 o'clock at night at this point, and they had said, all right, well, let's call it here. We've got the information, and they had narrowed down the fact that she did indeed own property in the Common District. And they also found out that she had a magical, like laboratory, basically, like a workshop in the Mage Quarter, the Mage District. Wizard District? Yes, Wizard District, that one. A Wizard District in the city. And this was basically okay, we have information, next session we'll start planning, and then we will go and we will find this Jareen person, and we will make her pay and bring her to justice for screwing us out of money and land. So they did get a little bit of the runaround this session, but I don't think that it was unreasonable, although that may be because I was the DM, and of course, when I make things, I think that they're good. So, but you can definitely tell that they had a problem with the Investigator Lomas NPC. So, at the end of the day, remember this. Make sure your PCs are reacting to your NPCs in the desired fashion. Yes. That is pretty much it for the very first session. We called it right after the scene at the Landmasons Guild, and we will pick up with their planning on the next episode. Tomorrow is our 34th session, and I will probably not be uploading tomorrow. I probably won't have time with all the prep and the game itself taking place, but I will try at least by the end of the weekend to crank out the next episode of the campaign diary. Thank you everyone so much for listening. Again, if you could subscribe, share, favorite, whatever. It doesn't have to be with anybody in particular, just people that you think might enjoy this. As always, you guys are wonderful, and if you want more information about the setting, I can leave that in the description down below. And thank you all for being awesome and beautiful people. Have a good day, and don't be a dick.